Okay. The London Materialists. There exists a certain work which might afford very profitable reading for the leisure hours of skeptical men of science. It is a book published by Florence, the perpetual secretary of the French Academy, called Histoire des Richeries de Buffon. I'm not sure I spelled it correct in French, but anyway. The author shows in it how the great naturalists combated and finally conquered the advocates of the fac or fast simile theory, and how they still went on denying everything under the sun, until at times the learned body fell into a fury, an epidemic of negation. It denied Franklin and his refined electricity, laughed at Fulton and his concentrated steam, voted the engineer Pierre Dormet a straight jacket for his offer to build railroads, stared Harvey out of countenance, and proclaimed Bernard de Palissy as stupid as one of his own pots. In his soft-quoted work, Conflict Between Religion and Science, Professor Draper shows a decided propensity to kick the beam of the scales of justice and lay all such impediments to the progress of science at the door of the clergy alone. With all respect and admiration due to this eloquent writer and scientist, we must protest and give everyone his just due. Many of the above enumerated discoveries are mentioned by the author of the conflict. In every case, he denounces the bitter resistance of the part of the clergy and keeps silent on the like opposition invariably experienced by every new discoverer at the hands of science. His claim on behalf of science that knowledge is power is undoubtedly just. But abuse of power, whether it proceeds from excess of wisdom or ignorance, is alike obnoxious in its effects. Besides, the clergy are silenced now. Their protest would at this day be scarcely noticed in the world of science. But while theology is kept in the background, the scientists have seized this scepter of despotism with both hands, and they use it like the cherubim and flaming sword of Eden to keep the people away from the tree of immortal life and within this world of perishable matter. The editor of the London Spiritualist in answer to Dr. Gully's criticism of Mr. Tyndall's fire mist theory, remarks that if the entire body of spiritualists are not roasted alive at Smithfield in the present century, it is to science alone that we are indebted for this crowning mercy. Well, let us admit that the scientists are indirectly public benefactors in this case, to the extent that the burning of erudite scholars is no longer fashionable. But is it unfair to ask whether the disposition manifested toward the spiritualistic doctrine by Faraday, Tyndall, Huxley, Agassiz, and others does not warrant the suspicion that if these learned gentlemen and their following had the unlimited power once held by the Inquisition, spiritualists would not have reason to feel as easy as they do now, even supposing that they should not roast believers in the existence of spirit world, it being unlawful to cremate people alive. Would they not send every spiritualist they could to Bedlam? Do they not call us incurable monomaniacs, hallucinated fools, fetch worshippers, and like characteristics names? Really, we cannot see what should have stimulated to such extent the gratitude of the editor of the London Spiritualist. for the benevolent tutelage of the men of science. We believe that the recent Lancaster Duncan Slade prosecution in London ought at last to open the eyes of hopeful spiritualists and show them that stubborn materialism is often more stupidly bigoted than religious fanaticism itself. One of the cleverest productions of Professor Tyndall's pen is his caustic essay upon Martineau and materialism. At the same time, it is one which in future years the author will doubtless be only too ready to trim to certain unpardonable grossness of expression. For the moment, however, we will not deal with these, but consider what he has to say of the phenomenon of consciousness. He quotes his question from Mr. Martineau. A man can say, I feel, I think, I love. But how does consciousness infuse itself into the problem? And thus answers the passage from the physics of the brain to the corresponding facts of consciousness is unthinkable. Granted that a definite thought and a molecular action in the brain occur simultaneously, we do not possess that the intellectual organ nor apparently any rudiments of the organ, which would enable us to pass by a process of reasoning from one to the other. They appear together, but we do not know why. Were our minds and senses so expanded, strengthened, and illuminated as to enable us to see and feel the very molecules of our brain? Were we capable of following all their motions, all their groupings, and their electric discharges? If such there be, and were we intimately acquainted with the corresponding states of thought and feelings, we should be as far as ever from the solution of the problem. How are these physical processes connected with the facts of consciousness? The chasm between the two classes of phenomena would still remain intellectually impassable. This chasm, as impassable of Professor Tyndall as the fire mist where the scientist is confronted with his unknowable cause, is a barrier only to men without spiritual intuitions. Professor Bachman's outlines of lectures on the neurological system of anthropology, a work written so far back as 1854, contains suggestions that if the sciolists would only heed them, would show how a bridge can be thrown across this dreadful abyss. It is one of the bins in which the thought seed of future harvests is stored up by a frugal present. But the edifice of materialism is based entirely upon that gross substructure, the reason. When they have stretched its capabilities to their utmost limits, its teachers can at best only disclose to us an universe of molecules animated by an occult impulse. What better diagnosis of the element of our scientists could be asked than can be derived from Professor Tyndall's analysis of the mental state of the ultramontani clergy by a very slight change of names. For spiritual guides, read scientists; for pre-scientific past, substitute materialistic present. Say spirit for science. And in the following paragraph, we have a life portrait of the modern man of science drawn by the hand of the master. Their spiritual guides live so exclusively in the pre-scientific past that even the really strong intellects among them are reduced to atrophy as regards scientific truth. Eyes they have and see not. Ears they have and hear not, for both eyes and ears are taken possessions of by the sights and sounds of another age. In relation to science, the ultramontane brain through lack of existence is virtually the undeveloped brain of the child. And thus it is that as children in scientific knowledge, but as potent wielders of spiritual power among the ignorant. They countenance and enforce practices sufficient to bring the blush of shame to the cheeks of the more intelligent among themselves. The occultist holds this mirror up to science that it may see how it looks itself. Since history recorded the first laws established by man, there never was yet a people whose code did not hang the issues of the life and death of its citizens upon the testimony of 2 or 3 credible witnesses. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death, says Moses. The first legislator we meet in ancient history, the laws which put to death a man on the disposition of 1 witnesses are fatal to freedom. Says Montesquieu, reason claims there should be 2 witnesses. Thus, the value of evidence has been strictly agreed upon and accepted in every country, but the scientists will not accept the evidence of the million against one. In vain do hundreds of thousands of men testify to facts. Oculus habent et non vident, they are determined to remain blind and deaf. 30 years of practical demonstrations and the testimony of some millions of believers in America and Europe are certainly entitled to some degree of respect and attention. Especially so when the verdict of 12 spiritualists influenced by the evidence testified to by any to others is competent to send even a scientist to swing on the gallows for a crime, perhaps committed under the impulse supplied by a commotion among the cerebral molecules unrestrained by a consciousness of future moral retribution. Toward science as a whole, as a divine goal, the whole civilized world ought to look with respect and veneration, for science alone can enable man to understand the deity by the true appreciation of his work. Science is the understanding of truth or facts, says Webster. It is an investigation of truth for its own sake and the pursuit of pure knowledge. If the definition be correct, then the majority of our modern scholars have proved false to their goddess. Truth for its own sake, and where should the keys to every truth in nature be searched for, unless in the hitherto unexplored mystery of psychology? Alas, that in questioning nature so many men of science should daintily sort over her fact and choose only such of study as best bolster their prejudices. Psychology, just a second, having some coffee. Psychology has no worse enemies than the medical school denominated allopathists. It is in vain to remind them that of the so-called exact science, medicine confessedly least deserves the name. Although of all branches of medical knowledge, psychology ought more than any other to be studied by physicians, since without its help their practice degenerates into mere guesswork and chance intuitions. They almost wholly neglect it. The least dissent from their promulgated doctrines is resented as a heresy, and though an unpopular and unrecognized curative method should be shown to save thousands, they seem as a body disposed to cling to accept hypotheses and perceptions and decry both innovator and innovation until they get the mint stamp of regularity. Thousands of unlucky patients may die meanwhile, but so long as professional honor is vindicated, this is a matter of secondary importance. Theoretically, the most benignant. At the same time, no other school of science exhibits so many instances of pretty prejudice. Materialism, atheism, and malicious stubbornness as medicine. The predilections and patronage of the leading physicians are scarcely ever measured by the usefulness of a discovery. Bleeding by leeching, cupping, and the lancet had its epidemic of popularity, but at last fell into merited disgrace. Water now freely given to fevered patients was once denied them. Warm baths were superseded by cold water, and for a while hydropathy was a mania. Peruvian bark, which is a modern defender of biblical authority, seriously endeavors to identify with the paradisal tree of life, and which was brought to Spain in 1632, was neglected for years. The church, for once, showed more discrimination than science. At the request of Cardinal de Lugo, Innocent X gave it the prestige of his powerful name. Borrowed robes. In an old book entitled Demonologia, the author cites many instances of important remedies which, being neglected at the first afterwards, rose into notice through mere accidents. He also shows that most of the new discoveries in medicine have turned out to be no more than the revival and readoption of very ancient practices. During the last century, the root of the male fern was sold and widely advertised as a secret nostrum by a Madame Naufleur, a female quack, for the effective cure of the tapeworm. The secret was bought by Louis, that's 14, for a large sum of money, after which the physicians discovered that it was recommended and administered in that disease by Galen, the famous powder of the Duke of Portland for the goat, was the Dia Centurion something of Callius Aurelianus. Later it was ascertained that it had been used by the earliest medical writers, who had found it in the writing of the old Greek philosophers, so with the Eumid something of Dr. Hewson, whose name it bears. This famous remedy for the goat was recognized under its new mask to the Colchicum autumnale, or Midau saffron, which is identical with a plant called Hermodactylus, whose merits as a certain antidote to gout were recognized and defended by Oribasius, a great physician of the 4th century, and Aetus Amidinus, another eminent physician of Alexandria, 5th century. Subsequently, it was abandoned and fell into disfavor only because it was too old to be considered good by the members of the medical faculties that flourished toward the end of the last century. Even the great McGinty, the wise psychologist, was not above discovering that which had already been discovered and found good by the oldest physicians. His proposed remedy against consumption, namely the use of prussic acid, may be found in the works of Linnaeus, Amenitates Academia something, anyway, in which he shows distilled laurel water to have been used with great profit in pulmonary consumption. Pliny also assures us that the extract of almonds and cherry pits had cured the most obstinate cough. As the author of Demonologia well remarks, it may be asserted with perfect safety that all the various secret preparations of opium which have been lauded as the discovery of modern times may be recognized in the works of ancient authors, who see themselves so discredited in our days. It is admitted on all hands that from the time immemorial, the distant East was the land of knowledge. Not even in Egypt were botany and mineralogy so extensively studied as by the savants of archaic Middle Asia. Springle, unjust, and prejudiced, as he shows himself in everything else, confesses this much in his History de la Medicine. And yet, notwithstanding this, whenever the subject of magic is discussed, that of India has rarely suggested itself to anyone, for of its general practice in that country less is known than among any other ancient people. With the Hindus, it was and is more esoteric, if possible, than it was even among the Egyptian priests. So sacred it deemed that its existence was only half admitted, and it was only practiced in public emergencies. It was more than a religious matter, for it was considered divine. The Egyptian hierophants, notwithstanding the practice of a stern and pure mortality, could not be compared for one moment with the atheistical gymnosophists, either in holiness of life or miraculous power developed in them by the supernatural adjuration of everything earthly. By those who knew them well, they were held in still greater reverence than the magians of Chaldea, denying themselves the simplest comforts of life. They dwelt in woods and led the life of the most secluded hermits, while their Egyptian brothers at least congregated together, notwithstanding the slur thrown by history on all who practiced magic and divination. It has proclaimed them as possessing the greatest secrets in medical knowledge and unsurpassed skill in its practice. Numerous are the volumes preserved in Hindu convents in which are recorded the proofs of their learnings. To attempt to say whether these gymnosophists were the real founders of magic in India, or whether they only practiced what had passed to them as an inheritance from the earliest rishis. Is that close to the Roshaniya secret society? I'm just reading the footnote. Maybe it has something to do with Roshaniya. Anyway, the seven primeval sagas would be regarded as mere speculation by exact scholars. The care which they took in educating youth, in familiarizing it with generous and virtuous sentiments, with them peculiar honor, and their maxims and discourses, as recorded by historians, prove that they were expert in matters of philosophy, metaphysics, astronomy, morality, and religion. Says a modern writer, they preserved their dignity under the sway of the most powerful princes, whom they would not consent to visit, or to trouble for the slightest favor. If the latter desired the advice for the prayers of the holy men, they were either obliged to go themselves or to send messengers to these men. To these men, no secret power of either plant or mineral was unknown. They had fathomed nature to its depth, while psychology and physiology were to them open books, and the result was that science, or machagiotia, that is now termed so superficially magic. Ah. Okay. While the miracles recorded in the Bible have become accepted facts with the Christians to disbelieve, which is regarded as infidelity, the narratives of wonders and prodigies found in the Atharva Veda either provoke their contempt or are viewed as evidence of diabolism. And yet, in more than one respect, and notwithstanding the unwillingness of certain Sanskrit scholars, we can show the identity between the two. Moreover, as the Vedas have now been proved by scholars to antedate the Jewish Bible by many ages, the inference is an easy one, that is, one of them has borrowed from the other. The Hindu sacred books are not to be charged with plagiarism. What that word means. First of all, I think I would stop on the first stop over here. First of all, their cosmogony shows how erroneous has been the opinions prevalent among the civilized nations that Brahma was ever considered by the Hindus their chief or supreme god. Brahma is a secondary deity, and like Jehovah is a mover of the waters. He is a creating god, and has in his allegorical representation 4 heads, answering to the 4 cardinal points. He is the demiurgos, the architect of the world. In the primordiate state of the creation, says Polier's Mythology des Indus, the rudimental universe, submerged in water, reposed in the bosom of the Eternal, sprang from his chaos and darkness. Brahma, the architect of the world, poised on the lotus leaf, moved upon the waters, unable to discern anything but water and darkness. This is as identical as possible with the Egyptian cosmogony, which shows in its opening sentences Athtor, or Mother Night, which represents illimitable darkness, as a primeval element which covered the infinite abyss, animated by water and the universal spirit of the eternal dwelling alone in chaos. As in the Jewish scriptures, the history of the creation opens with the Spirit of God and his creative emanation, another deity, perceiving such a dismal state of things. Brahma soliloquizes in concentration, "Whom am I? Whence came I?" Then he hears a voice, "Direct your prayers to Bhagavant, the eternal, known also as Parabrahma. Brahma, rising from his natatory position, seats himself upon the lotus in an attitude of contemplation and reflects upon the Eternal, who, pleased with his evidence of piety, disperses the primeval darkness and opens his understanding. After this, Brahma issues from the universal egg, infinite chaos, as light, For his understanding is now opened, and he sets himself to work. He moves on the eternal water with the Spirit of God within himself. In his capacity of mover of the waters, he is Narayana. The lotus, the sacred flower of the Egyptians, as well as the Hindus, is a symbol of Horus as it is that of Brahma. No temples in Tibet or Nepal are found without it, and the meaning of the symbol is extremely suggestive. The sprig of lilies placed in the hand of the archangel, who offers them to the Virgin Mary in the pictures of the Annunciation, have in their esoteric symbolism precisely the same meaning. We refer the reader of Sir William Jones. With the Hindus, the lotus in the emblem of the productive power of nature, through the agency of fire and water, spirit and matter. Eternal, says a verse of the Bhagavad Gita. I see Brahma, the creator, enthroned in thee above the lotus. And Sir W. Jones shows that the seeds of the lotus contain, even before they germinate, perfectly formed leaves, the miniature shapes of what one day, as perfected plants, they will become, or as the author of the heathen religion has it, nature thus giving us a specimen of the perfect preformation of its production, adding further that the seed of all phoenogamous plants bearing proper flowers contains an embryo planted ready formed. Many so hard words for me, really. I have only like 6 pages left. I will read them later on. See you.